Today I'm in Holmfirth in West Yorkshire with retired detective Gary Heseltine. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you very much.
Okay, now last time we spoke we were talking about your new magazine. Just tell us what stage it's at now, Gary.
Well, the first issue, it's a bi-monthly magazine. It's an online e-zine because the technology is there for tablets, smartphones, etc. People are happy now to read off the screen. I said originally it was going to be 84 pages, but I think now with the material I've got from all the columnists, it's probably going to be a 96-page colour bi-monthly magazine. The first issue will be out on the 25th of June. The website's fully up and running for subscription availability, so you can subscribe either bi-monthly or you take a yearly subscription. There's a special offer on at the moment.
Right, so this is UFOtruthmagazine.com is the website, and tell us the principle that the magazine is based on.
Well, the principle is that over the last 11 years of my research, I've gradually got to know pretty much all of the world's top researchers. I've been on many conference platforms with them, and there are various people I think are just world class and who I respect personally. So I've approached many of these people to act as either guest columnists or regular columnists for the magazine, and they've all agreed to be so. So I think I've now probably got the strongest lineup of accepted UFO researchers anywhere in the world.
Okay, and you can get yearly subscriptions from richplanet.net as well, which is there's an offer of I think it's £16 for
six issues for the price of 4.
Right.
But you want to be hurry, because after the 16th of June that offer expires,
right.
And then it'll be 6 issues for the price of 5,
right.
£20.
Right.
But still good value, something like 60p a day.
Right, so just list some of the columnists you've got.
Right, regular columnists, it's all around the world. You've got AJ Javar, Brazil, one of the top 5 I would say in the world. Roberto Panotti from Italy. You have got Bill Chalker from Australia. You've got Susan Hanson from New Zealand. You've also got Mary Rodwell as an experienced and one of the most respected people in that field. She's there. Pia Knudsen from Denmark. There's a whole host.
Right.
And
don't forget David Caton.
No, that's the foreign speakers.
The unsung hero of modern day ufology.
Absolutely. David Caton is there as one of my regular columnists. There's probably 7 or 8 of the top British ufologists there. Right. To name a few, yourself might be in that. Just crept in there into that qualification, but yeah, David Caton, and you're looking at Alan Foster, people like that. So there's a whole host, and then guest contributions are going to be by the likes of Steve Bassett, from Stanton Friedman, Robert Salas, a whole host of people. So you know, I've met with a very positive attitude. What makes the magazine, I think, different from any other UFO magazine is the fact that I'm in its mission statement, I set out to do something that, as far as I can see, has never been done before, which is basically saying that any money raised through subscriptions, either bi-monthly or yearly subscriptions, a third of the money to the magazine will be set aside, ring-fenced for UFO causes. Right. And initially that'll support British ufology, give us a funding mechanism that we need to have to set up decent venues, speakers, flight costs, etc, etc. Right. But in time I hope that if the magazine takes off in a big way worldwide, that it will create a fund so that, say, if MUFON want to do a forensic test on an animal mutilation, they can apply for a grant and we can either pay for all of it or some of it.
Right, okay. You mentioned Steve Bassett there, and yep. He has recently organised the citizens' hearings at the Washington DC Press Club. Now,
yep.
For those who don't know,
National Press Club, yeah.
Yeah, who Steve Bassett is. He's been campaigning for the US government to admit what it knows about UFOs to the public. He was involved in the original Disclosure Project conference in 2001, May 2001, and if you've never seen that, do look it up. Disclosure Project conference, May 2001, which was also at the Washington Press Club.
Yeah, it's the National Press Club, and it's just 2 blocks from the White House, and this is such a prestigious place that all the former presidents, Reagan, Gorbachev, visited, Nelson Mandela, have all spoken at the same place. Right. So this is a very well-known place.
Right, so this is 5 days of hearings organised by Steve Bassett. Now let's just touch on how he managed to set this up. Someone gave him $1.1 million.
That's what I was told. I think Steve for years and years has done incredibly well trying to get these conferences put together, but this was a little bit different, and then Steve would say that this wasn't a conference, this was a mock congressional hearing, because the idea was that if the politicians won't let us have a proper debate about the subject, we'll organise our own debate, as it were. So that's what it was. He approached what turned out to be a former senator who actually ran for the presidency in I think 2008, which was Mike Gravel, 5 former congressmen and women. They became what was called the panel of politicians, and it was set up like a courtroom, and people gave evidence, taking an oath, and under oath, like you were in a courtroom, to tell the truth about their testimony in front of this panel of politicians. And it was all done, and obviously being a detective for many years, police officer, I can say absolutely that they set it up perfectly, and it was very solemnly done. You know, people swore in the oath solemnly and gave their testimony like they would do in court, so it was as close to it as a proper hearing.
Now, they're all former senators, weren't they? So, and we need to also point out, I think, that they were all paid $25,000.
$20,000 each.
$20,000 each of the 1.1 million that Bassett had. Okay, so the intention was to raise the profile and get an actual hearing in Congress.
I think his original aim was to kind of embarrass the actual Congress, that they weren't open to open debate about the subject. So by doing this, what I think he hoped to achieve was that by the end of it, he was hoping that the panel of politicians would say, yeah, we support the call for full congressional hearings, which is what they did at the end of it. We'll talk about that in a bit.
Yeah. So 5 days, 5 sort of
9 till 5.
Right.
About 40 witnesses and top researchers.
So you had different sort of themes on each day. You had a nuclear panel who was talking
there was
about
a nuclear tampering panel, which was extremely powerful. One of the highlights of the week, for example, Captain Robert Salas, who was in the 1967 Maelstrom missile 1967, where he's in his bunker, and basically he gets a call from the topside guard saying that there's a UFO over his missile silo, and then 10 of his missiles shut down. Well, there were 4 people on that panel, all recounting similar events, 2 of which had never come forward before. Very powerful testimony to the reality of the UFO phenomenon. Right,
and we had other notable witnesses. Paul Hellyer, who was the ex-Defence Minister of Canada.
Yeah, former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada at one time as well.
Right, and he's written a book which covers some of the UFO subject, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he is obviously somebody of his political background. It's a bit of a coup when he came out a few years ago saying that he believed from his inquiries that there was an ET engagement with the Earth. Well, he basically said the same thing at the panel, but obviously because of his, you know, how many deputy prime ministers do you have, you're willing to go on camera and say that.
Right. Now, other notables were Richard Dolan, yourself. You spoke for 11 minutes?
Basically everybody was initially given 10 minutes to do a word-for-word presentation, which you were supposed to have timed and handed in. It didn't exactly work like that. You know, Peter Davenport, bless him, he was on my panel, but he spoke for 20 minutes, and he's obviously just carried on, and he completely forgot that. But by the by, everybody had an allocated time that each witness would be given an allocated time to give whatever testimony it was, and then once all the people on that session had given their testimony, which were 4 or 5 people, then there would be a Q&A session by the politicians who they could ask anybody on who'd given testimony.
Right, and we were talking about the press coverage earlier. Very little press coverage of this event.
I was very disappointed, or not surprised, but I was very disappointed that I didn't see any mainstream TV there. I mean, there were some mainstream articles. There'd been one in the Washington Post. There'd been various little pieces, and at the end of the week there was a very what people deemed as being quite an historic one in the New York Times, which was made it a serious issue, and it apparently in the New York Times has never ever done that, but that was at the end of the week.
Now, another notable name who was there is Stephen Greer, who hosted the original Disclosure Project conference, and in my eyes he's become quite a controversial character now, and I could spend a whole programme
he is a controversial
explaining why. And there were people who were invited who wouldn't turn up because he was there.
Well, I don't know all the political things behind, but yeah, I think it's fair to say that some people would not go who would have been excellent witnesses,
right.
But chose not to because of some of the people that were giving evidence, which is a shame.
Right, okay. Now, let's...
I mean, we can talk about the Sirius movie if you want.
Yeah.
I fundamentally would have to say, and I'd never met him before, but I met Steve Greer while I was there briefly, but he's a very charismatic speaker. He's a very good speaker when he wants, and he certainly knows a lot. And if what he says about patents being taken off the market, about free energy and things like that, that's an area where I think he's very powerful on. The Sirius movie was...
Right, let me just interrupt you there, Gary, straight up. My opinion of that is he's a...
Okay, I don't know enough about that, but that's how he comes across.
Okay.
He is a good speaker, whatever you think to him otherwise. But the Sirius movie aired a week before, and he trailed that for months, saying that he had absolutely conclusive proof that the little Atacama figure, humanoid figure, was in some way extraterrestrial, hybrid or whatever. And it turned out a week before that it wasn't. So I think, with the best will in the world, that wasn't good for the conference. No. Because anybody press-wise that were thinking, well, they really might have it, it kind of, I think, you know, put a dead stop to them covering the citizens' hearing. Yeah,
just to expand on that, for those who aren't aware of this movie, you can watch it online still, I think. It's called Sirius, and it's about Stephen Greer sort of going through various cases in the UFO phenomenon, but throughout this documentary he's presenting this little
6-inch
being,
which turns out to be, it is if from what I can gather, it still is very bizarre, but it doesn't turn out to be extraterrestrial. It turns out to be a very strange 6 to 8 year old 6-inch
and it has
child. Not a child.
In the documentary they state categorically that it's got human mitochondrial DNA, and I think
there's a missing 9% that they count of.
Right.
They're still doing further research.
Right, okay, but it looks like it's probably human. So my question is, why didn't they use Lloyd Pye's evidence?
Absolutely, I agree. I think Lloyd Pye has got a fantastic case there.
Yeah, he seems to have, assuming that his DNA results are all genuine and we can corroborate them and repeat them.
That appears to be the strongest.
Yeah, that looks like the
ancient alien, as it were.
The skull that he has.
Absolutely.
Isn't human, assuming all of his results are correct. So,
absolutely.
So why did Greer put that in? That's the question I would ask. I would have completely left that out of the documentary, because all it's doing is
the documentary tried to do 3 things, and you can't do that. It should have featured on one. He talked about technology, he talked about the UFO cover-up, and then he talked about the alien body, the Atacama body. And then for really, it should have been just one of those 3 things. So it was fundamentally flawed for me.
Let me just make one other comment about Stephen Greer. His 2001 conference was absolutely fantastic, I thought.
The basic idea of disclosure is incredible, but that was just a 2-hour conference. It'd never been done before, and there was a whole host of mainstream cameras there. Unfortunately, what some people will say is that some of the people that's involved in giving testimony aren't as vetted as what they should be. Right. I think that's the key. Okay.
Now, another person who spoke at the conference was our old friend, Nick Pope.
Nick Pope, bless him. Bless him.
Just.
Do you want to? I'll give you a Nick Pope moment. Right, a Nick Pope moment. He was on a couple of panels discussion before the politicians, and on one of them he was speaking, surprisingly I thought, about countries, and he was on there from the UK. Now basically he's never said anything, I think, really positive about the UK, but he was on the panel. That's by the by. But what was interesting is that in the morning there'd been a session with pilots, and one of the, and some of the testimony from the pilots, in particular there was one called Colonel Oscar Santa Maria from Peru, who basically was flying a jet to a radar confirmed UFO in daylight, and he comes across what he thinks is a balloon just hovering motionless, and he's told to destroy it. So he actually lets go of 64 rounds at this, thinking it's going to explode as a balloon, but it doesn't. There's no effect, and then suddenly this object starts moving away at weird and wonderful angles, and he goes into a pursuit for 80 minutes. What I'm getting to is the fact that that testimony by this first-hand pilot absolutely had the politicians jaw-dropping. And one of the former congressman, Merrill Cook, who had been, I think, fairly sceptical throughout the week. This is the Thursday of the week, so 4 days in. His jaw was literally on the floor. His body language, his jaw was on the floor as he was hearing this. And then in the afternoon, Nick came on talking about UFOs and in Britain and whatever. And Merrill Cook actually said to Nick Pope, he says, well, Nick, you've retired from the MOD. You can speak freely. What do you think about the ET phenomenon? And paraphrasing, he basically said, well, I'm not quite convinced yet.
I'm not quite there yet.
I'm not quite there yet, and I suppose that's a funny way of saying I don't know. And Merrill Cook, if you were in the room, his face was a picture, because he's thinking, well, you've been doing this for 17 years. If you don't know now, you never will. And Merrill Cook was absolutely blown away by the testimony in the morning. So it doesn't add up. So you know, that's Nick being Nick, but I don't understand it.
It's Nick following his rules of engagement that are defined by his masters.
Well, maybe.
All right then, join us after this. Excellent. Right, I hope that was all recorded. Yeah. Welcome back. I'm talking to Gary Heseltine, and we've been discussing the citizens' hearings which took place in April and May 2013. This is 5 days of hearings.
9 till 5, yeah.
In front of 5 retired...
Six, one former senator and 5 former congressmen and women. Right. Collectively they had 80 years of public office service. The
intention being to try and bring about a real congressional hearing in Congress. Okay.
A debate.
A debate.
A debate.
Now, one person who spoke, Richard Dolan, he had some new information given to him by some CIA officer. Did you see that one, Gary?
No, they showed like a deathbed, well, close to a deathbed from somebody who was apparently going to die very soon, obviously in ill health, and he was a man that claimed that he'd been involved very heavily in I think was with Eisenhower and people like that there was a secret initiative going on, and he basically confirmed that there had been interaction between government and ET in the past. And
he specifically named S4 as being a facility where ET technology was being hidden and work was being carried out.
His name never came out, for obviously that won't come out until his death, but apparently that's not going to be too long.
But the point for me was that that's corroborating some of Bob Lazar's story.
Bob Lazar, your hero. So no, I agree. If that's true, then that's great testimony. But until he's named and he can be checked out, then it's still up in the air. But it was powerful testimony.
Right. Now let's look at some of the other key moments.
For me, there was a key moment definitely on day one. At the end of the first day, bear in mind that these politicians had obviously been told that they're going to get presented with evidence, but I don't think they knew the depth of the evidence and the documentary evidence, the physical evidence, etc., testimonial. By the end of the first day, you could see that the politicians were almost brain overload, because they were given so much credible information that you could see them almost sinking in the seat thinking, what have we done? We had no idea, and they were actually saying all that.
They've earned 25 grand.
20.
Sorry, 20 grand.
But basically there was what I call a eureka moment. When it came to summing up the end of the first day, former Congresswoman Carolyn Kilpatrick was the one who just happened to be summing up, and she said quite without any prompting that after just hearing one day's testimony, she was convinced that there should be a call for full congressional hearings, such is the quality of the evidence, which then prompted the rest of the panel to stand up and clap. The whole audience broke out in clapping, and Steve Bassett came into the room and took a bow. So that was kind of a eureka moment, in the sense that if we were trying to impress upon politicians, look, there really is something to this with these credible witnesses, after one day they were saying, yeah, we agree.
that all sounds fantastic, and I wish I'd been there to see that. Could that not be a form of containment? That you've got all of the top people in ufology who are talking to some presumably important people. It's all very nice and sort of they think you've achieved something, but have you really?
Well, I think the testimony will be in time.
Yeah.
We'll hear to see. I mean, what I've said is that well, let me clarify that by saying what the week set out to do, I think, was to get the politicians to actively talk about the subject. Albeit they were retired, but with 80 years service, they obviously were experienced people, and they were actively engaging and having debates about ET. Now, you'd never get that with politicians otherwise, so it was well worth it on that. I think we certainly did impress upon them through the quality of the nuclear issue, pilots, etc., police officers, that there was more than enough of good evidence for full congressional hearings. We had obviously Caroline Kilpatrick saying at the end of the first day, I've heard enough to say that there should be full congressional hearings. But by the end of the week, basically 4 of the 6 of the politicians agreed to sign a mandate that said that there should be a call for full open congressional hearings, but also that they wanted that the United Nations be approached. And apparently in 1979, when Grenada had the last debate, there's a motion that's still on the statute book that can be resurrected. But what it takes is it'll take a country to make a nomination to resurrect it, to have a debate. So 4 of those 6 called for a UN. So we're hoping perhaps one of maybe the South American countries makes that mandate. So essentially there could well be an open debate about the best evidence at the United Nations.
Yeah, I mean, last night we were talking about this in a slightly different context, in as far as you have a sort of philosophy, if you like, that you're quite happy to fight them from within their own system. Like you've been on morning TV.
Yeah, I've been on national television.
You did very well there. Now I won't do that unless I can see what they're going to put out. So I'm fighting.
Your hand is tied behind your back when you go on live TV, and I'm certainly aware of that. But I think that both stances are valid. I think you are more vocal than me because you're outside of that and you have the platform to do that. For me, I take the choice to be within it, and I think that I'm a good speaker and quite quick on my feet thinking wise. So I think I kind of want to get into that debate and try to promote it from within, because I think that we have to try fighting on several fronts. You're doing it on one front, and I'm trying to fight it on the other mainstream front.
I find that it would be like almost trying to negotiate with the mafia.
Oh, it is. It is like negotiating with the mafia. But occasionally you get a bit of a breakthrough, and certainly since I've retired, there are 1 or 2 TV executives that have approached me tentatively about what I've wanted to do for a while, which is write and present a TV series on the best evidence. So there are some little tentative things going on that they now know that I've retired, so I've got more time to do that. So that's things that are possibly out there.
Okay. Now then, we're in beautiful West Yorkshire, Gary.
Yep.
And what, 25 miles down the road is a place called Todmorden.
Yep.
And you've interviewed
Alan Godfrey,
who had a classic abduction, it seems, in 1980. Now, I've spoken about Todmorden in my recent speaking tour, and I did sort of push the boat out and suggest that I think somewhere in that region, because it's a vast area of unpopulated land, there's been some key UFO sightings, in particular large, black, completely silent flying triangles, and there's just too many cases, and they seem to be focused around that area for me, because I've plotted them all on a map of the UK. There was key sightings there. There's a case in 1980 of a UFO coming out of a reservoir. So this is something that I'm keen to look into. The significance of that area of Todmorden. Well,
certainly historically, certainly in the 80s and 90s, there was a large number of UFO police reports. If you look at some of the statistics on the Prufos database, when you plot it on a map of England, there's the largest correlation of police sightings is in Yorkshire as a whole, and West Yorkshire as a principal of that county. So, there certainly seems to be historically a lot of activity in the Todmorden, Bacup area on that Yorkshire-Lancashire border area. Now, yeah, I see what you're saying. You said to me that there's quite a lot of triangular, silent triangle sightings in that area. It is a very barren area. I think your belief is that there's some kind of base there.
Yeah. I think if you were to look at all of the evidence and you had to guess at one particular place under the ground, that's where I'll plump for. Because a lot of these triangle sightings are, the craft are almost always seen flying very low, and I can't think of many witness statements of them flying off to a high altitude as if they're going to space. So
it's as if they're here just scanning the terrain.
Yes. So they've got to be going. I mean, we mentioned this in our interview that I showed in my presentation. They've got to be going somewhere. I don't think they're disappearing.
And I certainly think that it's perfectly logical that if ET is here and has been for a long time, that they would have bases in remote facilities, and that's as good a place as any.
Yeah, and this is another thing that I stressed in my tour. I'm happy for people to have the view that these triangles are of human origin, if that's what they're comfortable with. My point is they're definitely here and they're being facilitated, and our government and our media are not speaking about them. So there's a cover-up on it as far as I'm concerned.
And I accept what you're saying there, because you end up with this conundrum that that the skeptics can't have it both ways. The bottom line is, for those people who say, well, it's man-made technology doing this, well, that's fine, and there's all of those that will say it's ET. But the bottom line is, they both can't be wrong. What's clear is that there are silent triangular aerial platforms. That's the key. So then we have to find out where they are and what they're doing. And I think where you're coming from in this is that you think this is linked to animal mutilations.
Yes, well, animal mutilations and possibly abduction as well. Which is, again, it's another extremely controversial area. But
it's a valid one, because especially when you look at the work of David Caton and his Animal Investigation Unit, basically they've for years and years have done very detailed mutilation cases that are all showing the classic stripping of the jawbone, taking the udders and whatever. Now that is classic, and it's all around the world, loads of different species involved. In fact, David's written an excellent article in the current issue, the first issue of the magazine. Now when you look at evidence, as I do through police eyes, there is a lot of documentary evidence from vet reports and things like that. Physical photograph is documentary and physical evidence of something that's quite bizarre going on, and it's a worldwide phenomenon. So actually we're talking about some really good bit of evidence here that's never referred to in the media, or very rarely, and it's an area that is seen as too bizarre, but actually there's actually a lot of evidence to support it.
Now, just to touch on animal mutilation, there was a recent case just north of Dublin that I got sent to me, a horse, and had extremely regular incisions, circular incisions, and one of them, David Caton is very good at analysing photographs. Apparently there was a bridle on the horse. No, the incision had been made without removing it, so it was underneath the bridle, as David Caton said. Exactly, and it was clear from the photograph that the legs were all sort of buckled underneath the animal as if it had been dropped. So, and there were other incisions on the animal, and the local media was saying, we've got to catch these idiots.
Well, I think one of the key things that we talked about it briefly last night was that in all of the years of the worldwide phenomenon of mutilations, no one human being has ever been prosecuted. Is that right? As far as I know, I agree with that.
I mean, that
just shows you how bizarre this is.
People have been prosecuted for obviously animal cruelty, but it's never with
the precision.
It's never in a case where
no blood. At the scene, organs removed through the brain, from holes in the brain that are not gunshot wounds. This almost laser precision surgery.
And people who like to muddy the water say, it's just the military.
Why would you?
But they don't come up with any evidence of the.
Why would you, when you can own a farm and breed 1 million cattle or 1 million sheep and do whatever you want with them, when nobody would ever know in a government facility? Why would you be nicking? What was it? One case you said about?
Well,
1,500 sheep. Just disappeared from a field.
I mean, that's another mystery in itself. But just to come back to the triangles. In my opinion, whoever they do belong to, there's facilitation from a very high level, because some guy come up to me at one of my conferences and says, well, your AWACS type plane, they're above the UK all the time. They're flying around regularly with a big radar dish on, and because I suggested that they use very hilly areas because they're invisible to radar, land-based radar, but they're not invisible to AWACS type radar. And he said that they would, if there's a triangular platform the size of a football pitch traversing slowly across the Earth,
it won't even show up.
Well, an AWACS plane would. Not a ground-based radar
wouldn't pick it up.
If it's behind a hill, it wouldn't pick it up. But an AWACS plane that's 30,000 feet up, scanning the land with radar, would see it moving, so they would know about it, right?
Okay.
So there's no way, assuming it's a solid object given a radar return, they would have to know about it. So as we also were discussing the other day, we said that on a few occasions, aircraft have been sent out to intercept UFOs in the UK. There's the Sheffield case where Max Burns has researched it, and there was another case from 2000, the flying saucer case, where it seems that another jet crashed. This was in Aberdeenshire. It's been in my talk. So the point being that on occasions the military will vector to try and intercept a UFO. There
are recorded interceptions.
But my opinion is they've got key people who know that there's a standoff with these undisclosed craft, right? But occasionally that goes wrong, and they follow their normal rules of engagement of an intruder, which is that they will intercept. They'll go on an intercept. They'll send an AWACS plane in after the jets, which is exactly what happened with this 2000 case. But I think they've got key people who know about the UFO phenomenon who will say, no, we don't touch those, we don't go near them. There seems to be a standoff thing. Now that doesn't mean they're aliens, and it doesn't mean they're human.
But there's things allowed to operate without real knowledge.
Yes, there's facilitation of secret, silent aerial vehicles, some of them the sizes of football pitches.
Absolutely.
And to me that suggests there's some sort of unpalatable agenda behind them, which I think...
No, I think that's a reasonable assumption, and there are far too many cases, and there's, you know, if this was what we would say a terrestrial phenomena, it would have come out sooner or later. There'd be a mistake made and somebody would get arrested if man were involved. But I don't think this is. Everything points to the fact that there's something very bizarre going on, and that there is some kind of facilitation. So I agree with you on that.
All right then, Gary. Well, thanks for speaking to me today.
You're welcome.
It's nice to be here in West Yorkshire, and I think I'll have a little drive along to Todmorden now.
I think you should.